Mr. Sloane. It was late afternoon when Gargantola came into view and the water was at its lowest ebb. Pia was on the watch as the Mega approached the pool, and her heart leapt when she saw that the dolphins had congregated there, punctually following the flow of the tides. For the sake of their safety, she signaled to Horan to drop anchor while the Mega was still a kilometer or so away. Kenai had come to the bow to stand beside her, and she said, "Would you like to look at the dolphins close up?" "Absolutely," he said. "I'm anxious to meet the beast to which you have pledged your troth." "Come along, then. We'll go in Fakir's boat." They went aft to the Mega's stern and found Fakir waiting with his oars in hand. Pia stepped over and went to her usual place in the bow, while Kanai seated himself in the boat's midsection. A few strokes of Fakir's oars brought them to the pool, and soon two dolphins approached the boat and began to circle around it. Pia recognized them as the cow and calf pair she had identified earlier, and she was delighted to see them again. She had the impression, as she often did with Orkella, that they had recognized her too, for they surfaced repeatedly around the boat, and on one occasion the adult even made eye contact. Kenai was watching the dolphins with a puzzled frown. "Are you sure these are the right animals?" he said at last. "Of course I'm sure. But look at them," he said in a tone of plaintive complaint. "All they do is bop up and down while making little grunting sounds." "They do a lot more than that, Kanai," Pia said, "but mostly they do it underwater." "I thought you were going to lead me to my Moby Dick," said Kanai, "but these are just little floating pigs." Pia laughed. "Kanai, you're talking about a cousin of the killer whale." "Pigs have impressive relatives too, you know," Kanai said. "Kanai, Orkella don't look remotely like pigs." "No, they do have that thing on their back. It's called a fin, and I'm sure they don't taste as good as pigs." "Kanai," said Pia, "stop it." Kanai laughed too. "I just can't believe we've come all this way to look at these ridiculous porcine things. If you're going to risk jail for an animal, couldn't you have picked something with a little more sex appeal? Or any appeal for that matter." "Orkella have a lot of appeal, Kanai," Pia said. "You just have to be patient to discover it." Despite his jocular tone, Kanai's perplexity was genuine. In his imagination, dolphins were the sleek, steel-gray creatures he had seen in films and aquariums. The appeal of those animals he could readily understand, but he could see nothing interesting in the phlegmatic, beady-eyed creatures circling the boat. He knitted his brows. "Did you always know you were going to be tracking these animals around the world?" "No, it was an accident," said Pia. "I knew nothing about the species when I met my first Orkella. It happened about 3 years ago." She had been interning with a team doing a marine mammal survey in the South China Sea. At the end of the survey, the ship stopped at Port Sihanouk in Cambodia. A few members of the team went up to Phnom Penh to visit friends who worked with an international wildlife conservation agency. That was how they learned a river dolphin had been found stranded near a small village in central Cambodia. I thought I'd go and take a look. The village, it turned out, was an hour's journey from Phnom Penh and a long way inland from the Mekong River. Pia was driven there on a hired motorcycle. The terrain was a patchwork of huts, rice fields, irrigation ditches, and shallow reservoirs. It was in one of these reservoirs, a body of water no bigger than a swimming pool, that the dolphin had been confined. The animal had swum inland with the flooded waters of the rainy season and had failed to depart with the rest of its pod. Meanwhile, the irrigation ditches had run dry, shutting off its escape routes. This was Pia's first glimpse of Orkella brevirostris. It was about 1.5 meters in length, with a steel gray body and a short dorsal fin. It lacked the usual dolphin snout, and its rounded head and large eyes gave it an oddly remunerative bovine appearance. She named it Mr. Sloane, after a high school teacher to whom it bore a distinct resemblance. Mr. Sloane, the dolphin, was clearly in trouble. The water was drying up fast and there were no fish left in the reservoir. Pia went with her motorcycle driver to the next kampong and brought back some fish from the market. She spent the rest of the day sitting beside the reservoir feeding the dolphin. Next day she went back again with a cooler filled with fish. Although there were many farmers and children present, Mr. Sloane ignored the others and went straight over to Pia's side of the reservoir. I swear to you it recognized me. Back in Phnom Penh, there was much concern in the small wildlife community. The Orkella population of the Makang was known to be declining rapidly and was expected soon to fall below sustainable levels. The Makang Orkella had shared Cambodia's misfortunes. In the 1970s, they had suffered the ravages of indiscriminate American carpet bombing. Later, they too had been massacred by Khmer Rouge cadres, who had hit upon the idea of using dolphin oil to supplement their own dwindling supplies of petroleum. The once abundant population of Orkella in the Tonle Sap, Cambodia's great freshwater lake, had been reduced almost to extinction. These dolphins were hunted with rifles and explosives, and their carcasses were hung up in the sun so that the fat would drip into buckets. This oil was then used to run boats and motorcycles. Do you mean to tell me, Kanai said, that they were melted down and used as diesel fuel? Yes, in effect. In recent years, the threat to Orkella had grown even more serious. There was a plan afoot to blow up the rapids of the upper Mekong in order to make the river navigable as far as China. This would mean the certain destruction of the dolphins' preferred habitats. Thus, the stranding of Mr. Sloane was not an individual misfortune. It was the harbinger of catastrophe for an entire population. Pia was given the job of caring for the stranded dolphin while arrangements were made for transporting the animal back to the river. Every day for 6 days, Pia traveled up to the reservoir bearing cooler loads of fresh fish. On the morning of the 7th, she arrived to find that Mr. Sloane had disappeared. She was told that the animal had died during the night, but she could find no evidence to support this. There was no explanation of how the remains had been removed from the pool. What she did find were the tread marks of a heavy vehicle of some kind, probably a truck that led down to the water's edge. What had happened was all too obvious. Mr. Sloane had fallen victim to the flourishing clandestine trade in wildlife. New aquariums were opening throughout Eastern Asia, and the demand for river dolphins was growing. Mr. Sloane was a valuable commodity. Irrawaddy dolphins had been known to fetch as much as $100,000 on the black market. $100,000? Said Kanai in disbelief. For these? Yes. Pia was not inclined to be sentimental about animals, but the idea that Mr. Sloane would soon be sold off to an aquarium as a curiosity made her stomach churn. For days afterwards, she was haunted by the nightmare in which Mr. Sloane was driven into a corner of his tank by a line of hunters armed with fish nets. Trying to put the incident behind her, she decided to go back to the States to register for a PhD at the Scripps Institute in La Jolla. But then, an unforeseen opportunity came her way. A wildlife conservation group in Phnom Penh offered her a contract to do a survey of Mekong Orkella. The offer was perfect in every way. The money was enough to last a couple of years, and the material would count towards her PhD. She took the job and moved upriver to the sleepy town of Karachi. In 3 years, since she had become one of a tiny handful of Orkella specialists, she had worked everywhere Irrawaddy dolphins were to be found: Burma, Northern Australia, the Philippines, coastal Thailand, everywhere, in fact, except the place where they first entered the record of zoological reckoning. India. It was only when she reached the end of her story that Pia realized with a guilt start that she had not said a single word to Fokir since she stepped onto the boat. Listen, Kanai, she said. There's something I've been kind of puzzled about. Fokir seems to know this place so well, this island, Garjantola. He seems to know all about the dolphins and where they go. I wish I knew what first brought him here, how he learned about these things. Could you ask him? Of course. Kanai turned away to explain the question, and then as Fokir began to speak, he swiveled around to face Pia. This is what he says. I cannot remember a time when I didn't know about this place. Back when I was very little, long before I had seen these islands and these rivers, I heard about Garjantola from my mother. She would sing to me and tell me tales about this island. This was a place, my mother said, where no one who was good at heart would ever have cause for fear. As for this big shush, the dolphins who live in these waters, I knew about them too, even before I came here. These animals were also in my mother's stories. They were Bomb Bibi's messengers. She used to say they brought her news of the rivers and khals. They came here during the Bata. My mother said so. They could tell Bon Bibi about everything they had seen. During the Jawar, they scattered to the ends of the forest and became Bon Bibi's eyes and ears. This secret her own father had told her, and he had told her also that if you could learn to follow the shush, then you would always be able to find fish. I had heard these stories long before I came to the Tide country. And ever since I was little, I had always wanted to come and see this place. When we came to live in Morichapi, I would say to my mother, when will we go? When will we go to Garjantola? There was never time. There was too much to do. The first time she brought me was just a few weeks before her death. Maybe this was why, after her death, whenever I thought of her, I also thought of Garjantola. I came here time and again, and it happened that the shush became like my friends. I followed them where they went. That day when you came in that launch with the forest guard and stopped my boat, this was where I was coming, with my son. The night before, my mother had come to me in a dream and she had said, I want to see your son. Why do you never bring him to Garjantola? It will soon be time for you and me to be reunited. After all that, who knows when I will see him again? Bring him to me as soon as you can. I could not tell my wife this because I knew she would be upset and she would not believe me. So the next day, instead of taking Tutul to school, I took him to my boat and we set off to come here. On the way, we stopped to catch some fish, and that was when you came upon us in your launch. And what came of it? Pia said. Do you think she saw him, your mother? Yes. The last night we were here in my boat, I dreamed of my mother again. She was smiling and happy, and she said, I'm glad I've seen your son. Now take him home and come back so that you and I can be together again. Up to this point, Pia had been listening as if she were under spell. Kanai seemed almost to have vanished, creating the illusion that she was speaking directly with Fokir. But now the spell broke, and she stirred as if she had been jolted awake from her sleep. What does he mean by that, Kanai? She said. Ask him. What does he mean? He says it was just a dream. Kanai turned away from her to say a few words to Fokir, and suddenly, to Pia's surprise, Fokir began to sing, or rather chant, in a quick rhythm. What's he saying? Pia said to Kanai. Can you translate? I'm sorry, Pia, Kanai said, but this is beyond my power. He's chanting a part of the Bon Bibi legend and the meter is too complicated. I can't do it.